The ballroom glowed with warm golden lights, and the sound of gentle chatter filled the air. Guests in elegant clothes moved between tall tables, holding glasses of sparkling drinks and pretending to be deeply fascinated by one another's conversations. It was the kind of event where everyone tried to look more important than they really were, and where the smallest whisper about wealth or power spread faster than the music playing in the inn. Background. In the center of the room stood the host of the night, a billionaire who enjoyed being the loudest presence wherever he went. His confidence filled every corner of the hall. People laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, and his guests constantly hovered near him in hopes that he might remember their names or offer them some opportunity. He raised his glass high and shouted over the music, making the crowd quiet down around him. He loved attention more than anything else. "Let's make this night interesting," he said with a booming voice. "I have a challenge for all of you. Anyone here who can impress me on that piano over there, I'll marry them on the spot." Laughter spread through the room, some genuine, some forced. People turned to look at the grand piano sitting near the stage. It was polished so well that the lights above reflected off its shiny surface. Guests nudged one another, whispering jokes under their breath. No one took the billionaire seriously. They all knew he enjoyed saying things just to stir excitement. But in the far corner of the hall, a young woman stood holding a tray close to her chest. She wore a simple black uniform like the other servers. Her hair was tied neatly, her steps were quiet, and her eyes stayed focused on her work. Her name was Lena, and while the guests laughed at the billionaire's challenge, she stayed still, pretending she didn't hear anything. Lena had been working since the early morning. She had helped set up the hall, arrange the glasses, check the dinner placements, and now she moved from table to table offering drinks. She didn't mind the work. What she minded was the crowd, the way some guests acted as if servers were invisible, speaking around them but never to them. The way people looked at her uniform before looking at her face. Still, she pushed her feelings down. She had bills to pay and responsibilities waiting at home. She didn't have space in her life for pride, but as she passed by a group of guests, she heard one of them joking. Maybe one of the servers should try. They probably need the money the most. Another laughed. Can they even play a note? Lena tightened her grip on the tray, hoping they wouldn't notice her reaction. Their words brushed against an old part of her heart, a part she tried hard to keep hidden. She didn't want to think about the piano. Not tonight. Not ever. She turned away from the group and headed toward the kitchen door. But before she reached it, two of her fellow servers rushed toward her, whispering loudly. "Did you hear what he said?" One asked. Lena nodded, but kept walking. "You should play," the other said. "You told us before. You used to be amazing. You could show them all." Lena shook her head quickly. "I can't. Not here." "Why not?" Her friend insisted. "You could actually impress him. And even if you don't care about that, it would be fun to watch him eat his own words." Lena sighed. "It's not that simple." Her voice was soft, but firm. Her coworkers exchanged a look. They could tell the topic pained her, and they didn't push further. Still, one of them couldn't help adding, "But you'd be incredible. You have to know that." Lena gave a small smile before slipping through the kitchen doorway. Inside the kitchen, the noise of the ballroom became a faint, muffled background. The staff hurried around, plating dishes and checking orders. Lena placed her tray down and leaned against the counter for a moment, breathing slowly. She didn't want to remember. She didn't want to think about all the years she had spent practicing, the dreams she once held, or the moment everything fell apart. She had walked away from the piano for a reason. Life had forced her to choose stability over passion, and she chose what kept the lights on. Back in the ballroom, the billionaire continued entertaining the crowd. He liked to make big statements and watch the reactions. It made him feel powerful. He walked toward the piano and tapped the keys with his knuckles. "Come on, no one brave enough?" He called out. Guests teased each other, daring one another to try. But no one stepped forward. Then the billionaire turned his eyes toward the staff working around the room. "What about one of you?" he said, raising his voice again. "Surely someone among you knows a little music. Don't be shy. It might be your lucky night." Some people laughed again. A few clapped. The attention made several servers uncomfortable, including Lena. She kept her head down, praying he wouldn't single anyone out. But the billionaire liked to provoke. He liked seeing people squirm. He pointed loosely in the direction of the servers. "Come now. One of you must have tried to play something at some point in life. Or maybe," he gave a mocking smile, "maybe you're all too nervous to touch an instrument this fancy." The crowd chuckled at his remark. Lena felt a sting in her chest. She could handle rude guests. She could handle tired feet and long work hours. But she couldn't handle that tone one that assumed she was less capable, simply because of the clothes she wore. Her coworkers looked at her with wide eyes. They knew she was affected. They also knew she wasn't the type to cause a scene. One of them whispered, "Just ignore him." She nodded. That had always been her way. Stay quiet, do your work, go home. But ignoring wasn't easy when the billionaire kept going. He walked toward the area where the staff stood. His voice carried across the room as he said, "It's simple, really. Sit down, play something. Prove me wrong. Or prove me right." He actually laughed at his own words. People around him laughed too. Not because it was funny, but because they wanted to be seen laughing. Lena swallowed hard. Something inside her tightened, like a string pulled too far. She could hear her heartbeat loud in her ears as the billionaire continued speaking, his tone dripping with amusement. "Don't worry. I won't hold it against you if you can only play a children's rhyme. Every talent has to start somewhere." That was it. The word struck deeper than he meant. They reminded her of years spent practicing difficult pieces, the dream she once had of performing on grand stages, the competitions she prepared for with everything she had. She remembered the one moment she lost it all, a moment she didn't like to relive. She didn't move at first. She didn't look up, but the emotion swirling inside her grew heavier with each passing second. The billionaire waved his hand. "No one, really? Then I guess my joke was right." Before he finished, Lena placed her tray down on a nearby table. Her coworkers stared at her in shock. One whispered, "What are you doing?" Lena didn't answer. She wasn't sure herself. All she knew was that something in her had shifted. She no longer cared about the billionaire's challenge. She didn't want to impress him. She didn't want to prove anything to him, but she couldn't stand being mocked for something she had spent her entire youth pouring her heart into. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. The movement was small, but it drew instant attention. Guests turned, servers froze, and even the billionaire raised an eyebrow. She walked toward him with steady steps, even though her palms were sweating and her knees felt weak. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply moved with quiet determination. The billionaire looked amused. "Oh, and who might you be?" he asked, smiling like he already knew the answer. "Another brave soul?" Lena kept her voice calm. "I'd like to try." The room erupted with sounds. Some people muttered in surprise. Others whispered excitedly. A few snickered. The billionaire clapped slowly, pretending to be impressed. "Well, well, this should be interesting," he said. Lena walked past him and toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last. She had not touched a real piano in years. She wasn't even sure if her fingers would remember everything she once knew. But she sat down. The piano bench was warm from the lights above. The keys glowed softly. She placed her fingers above them, hovering for a moment. She didn't look at the billionaire. She didn't look at the crowd. She closed her eyes. She breathed slowly. The memories she had tried to bury rose again, her father's proud smile watching her practice. The hours she spent perfecting every piece. The moment she promised herself she would make music her life. She had lost that path. But maybe, just for a moment, she could remember what it felt like to be the girl who once dreamed. She opened her eyes. The ballroom was silent, and her fingers finally touched the keys. Lena sat at the piano, with her fingers lightly touching the cool keys. The room behind her felt far away, as if she had stepped into a different world. The sound of people talking had faded into a soft blur. She could no longer see the bright lights or the curious faces. All she felt was the weight of the moment and the memories she had tried for so long to bury. She wasn't ready to play. Not fully. A part of her wanted to run back into the kitchen, pretend this never happened, and return to her ordinary life. But another part of her, the part she had silenced for years, whispered that maybe this was the moment she needed. She took a breath. Slow and shaky dot behind her, the billionaire leaned against a table with a confident smirk. Sure she would embarrass herself. He whispered something to a guest next to him, and the guest chuckled softly. Their quiet amusement made Lena's heart twist. She wasn't here for them. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was here to reclaim something she once lost. Her fingers pressed the first key. A soft note floated through the air, almost too quiet, but it was enough to silence the whispers. Enough to make the crowd lean forward. Lena paused after the first note. She felt her throat tighten. Memories came rushing back. Her small apartment. The old upright piano her father bought secondhand. The evenings they spent practicing together, laughing, correcting, learning. She missed him more than she allowed herself to admit. Another breath. Another note. She began to play a slow melody, one she had practiced 1,000 times as a child. It wasn't a complicated piece, but it was warm and full of feeling. Her fingers moved carefully at first, unsure, testing themselves. The years away from the piano had made her rusty, but the old muscle memory lived somewhere deep in her hands. A guest in the crowd tilted their head. Another lowered their drink. The room softened as the familiar sound of piano music rose from her fingers. But Lena felt the hesitation in her hands. Every few notes, her fingers trembled. She wasn't fully herself yet. She wanted to keep going, but the more she played, the more her heartbeat raced. She suddenly felt everyone's eyes burning into her back. Her breath caught. She made a small mistake, and her finger slipped. The note came out wrong. A few people exchanged amused looks. Someone let out a quiet laugh. Lena froze. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her heart pounded hard in her chest. The mistake felt louder than the entire melody. She looked down at her hands, trying to steady them, but the quiet giggles from behind made her shoulders tense. She wasn't used to audiences anymore. She wasn't used to judgment. She wanted to disappear. The billionaire clapped once, slow and sarcastic. "Is that the best you can do?" he asked in a playful tone, loud enough for everyone to hear. The guests laughed again, following his lead. Lena's stomach twisted. Heat flashed behind her eyes. She wanted to leave. She wanted to walk out of the ballroom and never touch a piano again. But then she saw something. On the shiny black surface of the piano lid, she saw her own faint reflection. And behind it, as if layered in memory, she imagined her father standing there the way he used to, smiling gently, nodding, encouraging her. She closed her eyes. His voice echoed in her memory. "Don't stop in the middle. Breathe. Trust your hands." Her breath steadied. She opened her eyes again. This time, She straightened her posture and set her jaw slightly. The fear didn't leave completely, but she pushed it aside long enough to place her fingers on the keys again. She didn't play the same soft melody. Instead, she pressed a strong chord bold, full, vibrant. People in the room flinched at the sudden power of the sound. Lena didn't hesitate. She began a different piece, one she loved deeply but hadn't touched in years. It was faster, richer, and far more emotional. Her fingers moved with new confidence, weaving through notes as though her hands remembered everything on their own. The crowd fell silent. The billionaire's smirk faded. Her coworkers stood near the kitchen door, staring with wide eyes. They had heard her hum songs before, heard her talk about her past, but they had never seen her like this. Lena's face softened as she played. The music wrapped around her like an old friend. Her heartbeat slowed into a natural rhythm. Her hands stopped shaking. The ballroom around her disappeared again, but this time she didn't feel alone. She felt connected to her past, to her father's memory, to the dream she once loved. The guests watched as her melody grew stronger, each note carrying emotion she never spoke aloud. A few of them exchanged surprised glances. No one laughed now. No one whispered. The billionaire crossed his arms, his eyebrows lifting in genuine surprise. He hadn't expected this. Not from her. Not from someone he assumed had no talent. As Lena continued, the room began to shift. Guests who had come for the billionaire's flashy jokes and dramatic personality now stood still, completely drawn into the music. The elegance of the melody filled the hall in a way nothing else had that night. Lena didn't notice any of it. She was lost in the piece. Memories washed over, sitting on the old piano bench at home. The smell of dinner cooking as she practiced, her father humming along. The competitions she once dreamed of entering. She remembered her biggest dream, to play on a stage where people actually listened. She remembered the day everything changed, the morning her father got sick, the hospital bills, the sudden need to grow up too fast, the long nights crying alone in her room, the moment she closed the piano lid and promised herself she would focus on helping her family instead. As the music carried her deeper into her thoughts, a small tear slipped from the corner of her eye. She didn't stop playing. She kept going, letting her emotions flow through the keys rather than her voice. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, her playing had transformed. What began as shaky and uncertain had become confident and heartfelt. The billionaire uncrossed his arms. Something complicated flickered in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or admiration, or both. A woman in the crowd placed a hand over her chest, moved by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Others watched with soft expressions, realizing that the young woman sitting at the piano wasn't just a server trying her luck. She was someone with a story hidden beneath her quiet appearance. Lena pushed through the final section of the piece, letting the music swell. Her fingers lifted and fell with precision, and the room's breath seemed to move with her. She struck the final chord gently, letting it linger in the air. Silence followed. Pure silence. The kind that only comes when people are completely caught off guard. Lena kept her hands on the keys for a moment longer as she tried to steady her breathing. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't from fear now. It was from everything she had allowed herself to feel. She slowly lifted her hands away. Still, the room stayed silent. Then someone exhaled. A soft, shaky sound. A moment later, a single pair of hands clapped. Then another. Within seconds, applause filled the ballroom. Not loud, not wild, just honest and warm. Guests nodded to one another with surprised expressions. A few even looked ashamed for laughing earlier. Lena finally turned back to the crowd. Her eyes shimmered slightly, though she quickly blinked away the tears. The billionaire stood completely still. His confident posture had weakened. His face didn't carry a joke or a smirk. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure of himself. He cleared his throat. "That was unexpected," he said slowly. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. People around him whispered quietly, discussing Lena's performance with genuine awe. Lena felt her hands shaking again, but not out of fear this time. It was the rush of being seen, truly seen, after so many years that her coworkers rushed toward her, whispering excitedly, "That was amazing. I never knew you could play like that. You made the whole room quiet." Lena smiled shyly, but said nothing. Her throat felt tight with emotion. She stood up from the bench slowly, unsure what to do next. She wanted to run back to the kitchen, hide, and calm down. She wanted to step outside and breathe fresh air. She wanted to sit alone and let the moment sink in. But before she could walk away, the billionaire stepped forward. He stared at her for a moment, searching for words. His eyes no longer held arrogance. They held something more complicated. He opened his mouth to speak. Lena didn't know what he would say, but she knew one thing. Her life had just changed in a way she never expected. Lena stood beside the piano, her hands still trembling slightly as the echoes of her performance faded from the room. The guests continued staring at her, not with the mocking curiosity they had shown before, but with genuine surprise and admiration. For the first time all evening, she felt the weight of their attention in a different way. It no longer crushed her, it lifted her. But the billionaire's eyes were the ones she felt the most. He took a step toward her, and the crowd instinctively cleared a space, forming a loose circle around them. His expression was difficult to read. The loud confidence he carried earlier seemed to have melted away, leaving him strangely exposed. Lena swallowed hard and tried to stay calm. She didn't want him to thank her or compliment her. She didn't know what she wanted, only that she felt vulnerable standing there. The billionaire finally spoke. "You didn't mention you could play." Lena's eyebrows lifted slightly. She hadn't expected him to start with something so obvious. "I'm a server," she said quietly. "It's not something I talk about." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment. When he looked up again, his voice had softened. "You weren't just playing. You were telling a story." Lena didn't know how to respond to that. The room stayed silent, as if waiting for her to speak. But she didn't want to open up her heart in front of all these strangers. So she simply said, "Thank you," and turned slightly, hoping to step away. But the billionaire raised a hand. "Wait." His voice wasn't commanding like before. It held a quiet urgency. Lena paused. He hesitated for the briefest moment, glancing around the room at the guests who were all watching him. He wasn't used to hesitation. It made his voice shake a little when he finally talked again. "I owe you an apology." A few gasps echoed through the crowd. People exchanged looks. They weren't used to seeing him admit he was wrong. He was known for brushing things off or turning his mistakes into jokes. But tonight, something had changed. "I shouldn't have mocked you," he said. His words directed at her, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "That was disrespectful. I was trying to entertain the room, but I crossed a line." Lena studied him carefully. She didn't sense sarcasm. She didn't sense arrogance. He genuinely meant it. Still, she didn't want the moment to grow bigger than it needed to be. She didn't want the guests to start gossiping about her, or acting as though she had brought the billionaire to his knees. "You don't have to apologize," she said softly. "It's fine." He shook his head. "It's not fine. Not one bit. I treated you like you were less than everyone else here. And after hearing you play," he breathed out slowly, searching for the right words, "I was wrong." Lena didn't know what to say. She looked down, feeling a warmth rise in her chest, not from his words, but from the realization that she had stood up for herself without even trying to. Before she could reply, One of her coworkers came rushing to her side and placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "We should get back to work," they whispered gently. Lena nodded. That was what she wanted, to slip back into the kitchen, to breathe, to calm the storm inside her. But just as she took a step away, the billionaire said, "Hold on." The room stiffened again. Lena turned reluctantly. He cleared his throat. "I know I made that silly joke earlier about getting married if someone impressed me. I didn't actually think anyone would take it seriously." He paused, his cheeks turning a faint shade of pink that surprised everyone. "But I want to be clear. What you did here tonight was incredible. You deserve real respect." The crowd murmured with mixed surprise and curiosity. Lena stared at him, unsure how to respond. He ran a hand through his hair nervously. "I'm not asking anything of you," he said quickly, sensing the tension. "I'm just trying not to make a bigger fool of myself than I already have." He forced a laugh, but it was awkward. Lena felt a tiny smile tug at her lips. Just a tiny one. She didn't want to embarrass him more. She didn't want to make him feel small, even if he had tried to do that to her earlier. "You don't need to say anything else," she said gently. "It's done. Let's just move on." The billionaire blinked, as if surprised by her kindness. She turned to leave again, but this time, another voice stopped her. "Wait. Will you play another one?" It came from an elderly woman near the front of the crowd. She held a sparkling cane in one hand and looked at Lena with warm, encouraging eyes. Several other guests chimed in eagerly. "Yes, please." "One more." That was beautiful. For a moment, the room buzzed with hopeful voices, but Lena shook her head quickly. "I can't. I'm working. I shouldn't have even played the first one." Her coworkers nodded, knowing the truth. They were on a strict schedule, and the event wasn't supposed to feature random performances from the staff. The billionaire spoke up again. "You don't have to play if you don't want to. But if the only reason you're saying no is because you're working." He turned to the event manager standing nearby. "She's on break now. Give her whatever time she needs." The manager, startled, nodded obediently. Lena widened her eyes slightly. "You don't need to." "I want to," he interrupted gently. The room waited. Lena looked around at all the hopeful faces. These were the same people who had laughed at her earlier, yet now they watched her with admiration. She didn't trust the sudden shift. She didn't trust that it would last. But she wasn't doing this for them. She was doing it for herself. She drew a slow breath. "I'll play one more," she said softly. A warm wave of excitement spread through the room. She sat down again, this time with a bit more confidence. She placed her hands on the keys, letting her fingertips trace the smooth surface. She chose a gentler piece, something comforting, something warm. The first notes drifted through the room like soft whispers, wrapping around the guests and calming the lingering awkwardness. As she played, the billionaire silently watched her, his expression softer than before. He wasn't smiling to impress anyone. He wasn't joking. He was simply listening. Her music flowed gently, like a quiet breeze through a peaceful morning. It wasn't dramatic like the first piece. It was simple and heartfelt. The elderly woman closed her eyes with a content sigh. A few guests swayed gently to the rhythm. Lena kept her focus on the keys. Each note felt like a release, like she was letting go of years of silence. She didn't feel judged this time. She didn't feel watched with cruel curiosity. She felt accepted. When she finished, the applause was softer this time, not loud or overwhelming, but warm. Like a gentle embrace. Lena stood up slowly. The billionaire stepped forward again, but kept a respectful distance. "Thank you," he said quietly. Lena nodded once. "You're welcome." She turned toward the kitchen, hoping to return to the comfort of her work. This time, no one stopped her. People watched her pass with a quiet kind of respect that her coworkers met her with wide smiles. "You were incredible," one whispered. "You changed the entire mood of the night," another said. Lena smiled. But her thoughts were spinning. She felt proud, but also overwhelmed. She needed time to breathe. Inside the kitchen, she leaned against the counter and closed her eyes. Her heart was still racing, but it wasn't fear now. It was something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She touched her fingertips gently. They tingled from the music. A soft knock came at the kitchen door. She opened her eyes. A member of the staff peeked in. "He wants to talk to you," they whispered. Lena's chest tightened. "Who?" They tilted their head toward the ballroom. "The billionaire. He's waiting by the piano." Lena felt a strange mix of anxiety and curiosity. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a slow breath, and stepped toward the door. Whatever he wanted, she was ready to face it, but she had no idea just how much this conversation would change what came next. The next morning arrived quietly, with soft light slipping through the thin curtains of the guest room where she slept. She woke slowly, unsure for a moment where she was. Then she remembered the charity gala, the humiliating dare turned into applause, and the billionaire who had looked at her in a way no one ever had. She sat up, brushed her hair back, and tried to clear her thoughts. The world felt heavier than usual, as if it was waiting for her to take a step. She was not certain. She was ready for Dot. She moved to the window and looked out at the wide garden below. The grass sparkled a little with morning dew, and a gardener pushed a small cart across the path. Everything looked calm, almost too calm for her restless mind. She took a deep breath and told herself she needed to stay grounded. Last night was just a moment, she thought. A moment does not change a person's life. But the feeling in her chest argued differently. Downstairs, the house was already awake. The staff moved quietly but efficiently, preparing breakfast and arranging fresh flowers along the hallway tables. She felt shy walking among them, unsure if they saw her as a guest or someone who didn't belong. As she reached the dining room, she saw him there seated alone at the long table, flipping through documents while a cup of tea cooled beside him. He looked up the moment she stepped in, and his face softened. It was a small change, easy to miss, but it made something warm rise in her chest. She forced her steps to stay steady as she approached the table. "Good morning," he said, standing up politely. "Good morning," she replied, her voice low but steady. He gestured for her to sit. "I hope you slept well." "I did. Thank you again for letting me stay here," she said. "It was very kind of you. You were exhausted." "I couldn't let you go home that late," he replied. He tried to sound casual, but she could hear the sincerity in his tone. A maid placed a plate in front of her, and she murmured a small thanks. She wasn't used to people serving her like this. At the restaurant where she worked, she was always the one serving others. Being on the opposite side felt strange, almost uncomfortable, but she tried to act natural. He watched her quietly for a moment, then set down his papers. "I've been thinking about last night," he said. She froze inside, though she kept her face as calm as possible. "About what part?" "All of it," he admitted. "The way I acted, the way people reacted, and the way you played." She stared at her plate, unsure how to respond. "You surprised me," he said gently. "Not many people can do that." She let out a small breath, trying not to overthink his words. "I didn't mean to surprise anyone. I just played. That's all." "You call that just playing?" "That was skill," he said. "Real skill." Her cheeks warmed slightly. She had never been able to take compliments easily, especially from someone like him. She knew he was used to dealing with confident, polished people who fit comfortably in his world. They ate in a comfortable silence for a while, until he looked at her again. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. She lifted her eyes. "Yes? Would you play something for me today?" He asked. She blinked, surprised. "You want me to play now?" "Not this moment," he said with a small smile. "Just sometime today, if you feel like it." It felt strange, the way he asked, not demanding, not teasing, but almost hopeful. She didn't know how to reply at first. "I can," she finally said, "if it helps you relax after all your work." He shook his head lightly. "Not for work. For me." Her heart made a small, unsteady jump. She didn't respond right away. Afraid she would say something that revealed too much. After breakfast, he offered to show her the house. She agreed, though she felt shy walking beside him. He pointed out the art pieces he collected over the years, the library with tall shelves and warm lighting, and the music room that stood quietly at the end of a long hallway. She felt her breath catch when he opened the door. The room was peaceful and bright, with tall windows that looked out over the side garden. A large grand piano stood at the center, polished until the surface almost reflected the room. She stepped closer to it without thinking, drawn by the familiar shape and the memories it stirred. He watched her closely, but gently, as if he didn't want to disturb the moment. "You can play whenever you want," he said softly. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the piano. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is," he agreed, but she felt his gaze on her, not the piano. She sat down on the bench slowly, carefully, as though she wasn't sure she had the right. She placed her hands on the keys, but didn't press them yet. Her mind filled with memories of old music books, of evenings spent practicing in small, quiet rooms, of dreams she had once held tightly before life pulled her in another direction. He didn't rush her. He simply waited. Finally, she played a slow, gentle tune. It wasn't flashy or loud. It was something simple, almost like a whispered thought. The notes filled the room softly, wrapping around them like warm air. He closed his eyes, listening. For him, everything else in the world seemed to fade. There were no business calls, no responsibilities, no schedule pressing at him. Just the music. Just her. When the last note faded, she stayed seated, her hands resting quietly on her lap. She didn't turn to look at him yet. She was afraid of what she might see in his eyes. He stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "You have a gift," he said. "I don't say that lightly." She finally looked up at him. "It's not a gift. It's just something I learned." "No," he replied firmly, but not unkindly. "Some people learn. Some people feel." Feel. She didn't know how to answer that. He sat on the bench, leaving a respectful space between them. "Tell me something," he said quietly. "Why did you stop?" She took a slow breath. Her eyes drifted along the keys. "Life got busy," she said. "Bills don't pay themselves. Dreams take time I didn't have." He nodded, as if he understood more than she expected. "But I never stopped loving it," she added softly. He leaned a little forward, elbows resting lightly on his knees. "What if you didn't have to choose?" She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "What if you could work and still play? Still grow? Still enjoy it?" She gave him a small, unsure smile. "That sounds like something people say before reminding you that life doesn't work like that." He chuckled gently. "Maybe most people, but I don't think like most people." She looked at him properly then, studying his expression. He didn't seem to be making fun of her or throwing out empty promises. He looked sincere, truly sincere. The moment stretched between them quiet, delicate, almost fragile. A knock on the door broke the silence. One of his assistants stepped in, apologizing before explaining that he was needed for an urgent meeting. He stood up, though he didn't want to leave. He looked back at her. Please stay in the house today. Use anything you need. And play more if you want to." She gave a small nod. "Okay." He hesitated for a moment, then walked out. When the door closed, she stayed at the piano. She touched the keys again, this time with less fear and more longing. She played slowly at first, then more confidently. The room filled with melodies that felt like pieces of her heart she hadn't touched in years. Hours passed without her noticing. She played until her fingers felt warm and light, until the world outside the music room felt far away. Later, she stood by the window, looking out at the garden as the sun began to set. She wondered what he thought of her, why he was being so kind, and whether this strange, unexpected connection between them was real or simply a moment that would fade. Still, she couldn't deny the truth. She felt something growing, something she didn't ask for, but something she couldn't push away. And as much as she tried to be sensible, she couldn't help thinking that perhaps, just perhaps, her life was beginning to change in ways she never imagined. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of it. The next day began with a strange mix of calm and nervousness. She woke earlier than usual, her eyes opening before the alarm of the house staff echoed faintly down the halls. For a moment, she lay still in the soft bed, listening to the distant sounds of morning footsteps, quiet voices, doors opening and closing as the household came to life. She wasn't used to waking up in such a peaceful place. It almost felt unreal. She sat up slowly, brushing her hair back. Her thoughts drifted to the previous day, the music room, the piano, the way she played until she forgot the world, and the way he had watched her with quiet, sincere eyes. She didn't want to read too much into anything, but it was hard not to replay the moments in her mind. As she dressed, she reminded herself not to let emotions carry her too far. He was a billionaire with a busy life, and she was a simple restaurant worker. Their worlds were not meant to merge. She had to stay careful. Yet her heart pushed gently against that thought, asking her to at least allow herself to feel what she felt. When she finally made her way downstairs, the morning sun had filled the house with warm light. The smell of tea and fresh bread floated from the dining room. She hesitated outside the doorway, unsure if she should walk in. She didn't want to interrupt anything, but he was already there, standing by the table with a cup in his hand. He turned the moment he sensed her presence, as though he had been waiting. "Good morning," he said, with a softness she didn't expect. "Good morning," she replied, her voice quieter. He pulled out a chair for her, something no one of his status ever did for someone like her. She sat gently, grateful but unsure how to respond to such small kindnesses. "I heard you were playing yesterday," he said as he sat down across from her. She looked up. "The assistant told you?" He smiled a little. "No, I heard the music myself. I came by the hallway a few times." She blinked, surprised. "Why didn't you come in?" He lowered his eyes for a moment, thoughtful. "Because you looked free. I didn't want to disturb that." Her heart warmed in a way she couldn't control. She looked down at her hands to steady herself. Breakfast passed in gentle conversation. They talked about music, small stories from their childhoods, and things that made them laugh. She felt herself growing more comfortable around him, and that scared her a little. She couldn't afford to lose herself in someone else's world. After breakfast, he suggested they take a walk in the garden. She agreed, not wanting the morning to end. The garden was even more beautiful up close. Roses lined the paths, and tall trees cast cool shadows over the stone walkway. They walked slowly, quietly, as if neither of them wanted to rush the moment. At one point, he stopped near a fountain and turned to her. "There's something I want to ask," he said. She felt a small knot of nerves form. "What is it?" He took a breath. "I want to help you." She frowned gently. Help me? How? With music, he said simply. If you want it. I know you said dreams take time, and life gets in the way. But what if I told you that you don't have to give up that dream? Her eyes softened, but she shook her head lightly. It's not that simple. It can be, he insisted, though his voice stayed calm. I can arrange lessons, support, space, time, whatever you need. She let out a slow breath. You don't have to do that. I know, he replied gently. But I want to. She looked away, trying to gather her thoughts. I'm not someone who takes things easily. I don't want to feel like I owe you. His eyes softened. Then don't think of it as owing me. Think of it as someone who believes in you. Her chest tightened with emotion she didn't know how to hide. They stood quietly for a moment, watching the water ripple in the fountain. Then he asked something she hadn't expected. May I ask you a personal question? He said. She hesitated. Depends what it is. What made you stop believing in your own dreams? The question hit her deeply. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, gathering the courage to answer. Life was hard, she said slowly. Things happened. I lost people. I had to work. I had to survive. Music felt like something from another lifetime, something I couldn't afford to hold on to. He nodded, listening carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix her. He just listened. And sometimes, she added quietly, it hurts to think about what could have been. He stepped closer, not too close, just enough that she could feel his presence beside her. Maybe it's time to think about what still can be. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes properly. His gaze was steady, warm, and full of something she couldn't quite name. Why me? She whispered. He didn't hesitate. Because you're real. You're honest. You don't pretend. And because when you touch a piano, the whole room changes. Emotion swelled in her chest so quickly she had to look away again. They continued walking, though more slowly now. She felt his words lingering in the air between them, settling into her heart. She wasn't sure she could accept all he offered, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her every time he spoke to her like she mattered. When they reached the far edge of the garden, she noticed a bench under a tall tree. They sat there for a while, the breeze brushing softly through the leaves. He turned to her. Would you consider it? He asked. She shook her head lightly. I don't know what I should consider first. Your kindness, your offer, or everything I'm feeling. His expression softened. What are you feeling? She hesitated for a long moment. Then she spoke honestly. Confused, happy, scared, hopeful, all at once. Me too, he said, almost in a whisper. Her heart skipped at his admission. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt warm and full of unspoken things. Then a soft voice called from afar one of the staff, informing him of a visitor waiting in the house. He sighed gently, almost reluctantly. Duty calls? She gave a small smile. Of course. He turned to walk back toward the house, but paused halfway. Will you be here when I'm gone? She paused, her heart tugging softly. Do you want me to stay? He looked at her with unmistakable sincerity. Yes, I do. She felt her breath catch. Then I'll stay. The smile he gave her then was small but full of warmth, almost grateful. When he disappeared into the house, she stayed on the bench, looking out at the vast, beautiful garden. She let the wind brush against her face as she tried to process everything. His words, his kindness, his belief in her, the quiet connection growing between them. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if things would stay gentle or become complicated. But one thing was certain: her life was changing. Slowly, softly, but definitely changing. And for the first time in years, She felt the beginning of something she thought she had lost forever, hope. The afternoon sun rested gently over the garden when she finally rose from the bench. She brushed her palms over her skirt and walked slowly back toward the house, trying not to rush her thoughts. Everything felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Her heart carried questions she didn't know how to answer yet, but it also carried warmth, unexpected, unfamiliar, but undeniably real. Inside the house, the halls were quieter than usual. The distant sound of voices drifted from somewhere deeper inside, perhaps the visitor who had come for him. She didn't want to intrude, so she made her way to the music room. The moment she walked in, a familiar piano greeted her like an old friend. She sat down and let her fingers rest on the cool keys. She didn't play right away. Her mind wandered through everything that had happened since the gala night. The dare, the applause, the exhaustion, the kindness he had shown, the music that had poured out of her after years of silence. And now this, his belief in her, his offer, his sincerity. She had never expected someone like him to enter her life, let alone change it. Slowly, she pressed a few keys. A soft, wandering melody flowed out, like a quiet conversation with herself. The room filled with the gentle rhythm of her thoughts. Time passed quietly, peacefully, until she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, and there he was standing in the doorway, watching her with calm eyes. "You came back," he said softly. "I said I would," she replied. He stepped closer, his expression relaxed but thoughtful. "I didn't want to keep you waiting." "I didn't mind waiting," she said. The time went fast. He glanced at the piano. "You are playing again?" "A little." "It sounded beautiful," he said, moving to sit in the chair beside the piano. "Everything you do with music feels honest." She looked at him, searching his face for something she couldn't name. "You say things that are hard for me to believe. Not because I think you're lying, but because I'm not used to hearing them." "Then maybe you should start getting used to it," he replied gently. She smiled faintly, unable to hold it back. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," she said. He took a quiet breath before speaking. "You've changed something in me. I'm not sure when it happened or how, but it did. My life has always been planned, controlled, structured. And then you walked in small, quiet, with this unexpected strength. You don't even try to impress anyone, yet you do, without meaning to." She looked away, overwhelmed. "I'm just... And that's exactly what I mean," he whispered. The room fell into a warm silence. She turned slightly on the piano bench so she could face him more fully. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," he said. "Why did you say that joke at the gala? The one about marrying me if I played?" He let out a low breath, a mixture of embarrassment and honesty. "Because I was trying to be funny and failed. I didn't think you would actually play. I didn't understand who you were, or what your music meant. So it wasn't meant to hurt?" She asked. "No, never," he said firmly. "If I could take those words back, I would, because they didn't match the respect I have for you now." Her chest eased a little, as if a long-held weight loosened. "I didn't take it too deeply," she said quietly. "I was angry for a moment, but then I wanted to prove you wrong." "You did?" he said with a soft smile. "Completely." Another silence settled, this one gentler. "I meant what I said earlier," he continued, "about helping you, about being here for you. But I want to add something else." Her heart beat faster. "What is it?" "I don't want to make your life harder, or confuse you, or push you towards something you don't want. So whatever happens next, whether it's music, or whatever this is between us, I want it to happen at your pace. Only if you want it." She swallowed softly. "You're giving me a lot of choice." "You deserve choice," he replied. Maybe for the first time in a long time. Emotion swelled quietly inside her. She wasn't someone used to choices. Her whole life had been shaped by survival, by doing what had to be done. Hearing someone offer her space, patience, possibility, it touched her deeply. She met his gaze. "Can I tell you what I want right now?" He nodded. "Please." "I want time," she said. "Time to understand everything. Time to trust everything. Time to see where this leads. I don't want to rush." He smiled, warm and steady. "Time is yours." She felt relief wash over her. "And," she added with a shy breath, "I want to keep playing." "That," he said softly, "makes me happier than I can explain." A gentle laugh escaped her. Surprising both of them, he stood and walked over to the piano bench. For a moment he hesitated, then sat beside her, leaving enough space to respect her comfort, yet close enough to feel his presence. "Will you play something now?" he asked. "I can," she said, placing her hands on the keys. "But only if you don't stare at me like you're reading my soul." He laughed quietly. "No promises." She rolled her eyes softly but smiled. Then she began to play. This time the music wasn't hesitant or fragile. It wasn't weighed down by old memories or silent fears. It flowed with a new kind of hope, a quiet strength, a belief slowly returning to her fingertips. He listened, watching her, but not in a way that made her shy. It was a look full of admiration, gratitude, and something deeper. When the last note faded, she rested her hands on her lap. He didn't speak right away. He just sat there, letting the music linger. "That was beautiful," he finally said. "It felt alive." "It felt good to play," she admitted. "Really good." He nodded. "You belong near music." "Maybe," she said. "Maybe again." They stayed there for a while, talking softly about small things, memories from her childhood, his first attempts at learning instruments, funny stories from their lives. The room felt warm, like a safe corner away from the harshness of the world. After some time, he stood and gently offered her his hand, not pulling, not demanding, just an invitation. "Come," he said. "There's something I want to show you." She placed her hand in his, her heart fluttering. He led her down a hallway she hadn't been to before. At the end was a small room still being set up. Inside, a new upright piano stood near the window. She looked at him in surprise. "What is this?" "A room for you," he said softly. "If you ever want a space of your own here, to practice, to breathe, to feel safe. No one will disturb you. No expectations. No judgments." She felt her breath catch. "You did this today?" "I started it this morning," he admitted. "I guessed you might say yes to music again. I wanted to be ready." Emotion overwhelmed her like a gentle wave. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just tell me if it feels right." She stepped inside the room slowly, touching the piano with trembling fingers. It wasn't extravagant. It wasn't meant to impress. It was simple, warm, and sincere, just like the way he looked at her. She turned to him. "It feels kind," she said softly. He smiled. "Then it's the right thing." She walked back to him, unsure how to express everything building inside her. "You've changed my life," she said quietly. He shook his head, stepping closer. "No, you're changing your own life. I'm just here." She held his gaze, her heart steady now. For the first time, she didn't feel small beside him. She didn't feel like an outsider in his world. She felt seen. And accepted. And valued. "I don't know where things will go from here," she said honestly. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I want to find out." "With you?" She nodded slowly, feeling something deep, subtle in her chest, a soft, brave kind of hope. Then Let's take it one day at a time, she said. His smile was warm and genuine. One day at a time, he agreed, as they walked back toward the main hall. Side by side, something inside her shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, peacefully. Her life was no longer a story of surviving day to day, It was becoming a story of possibility. A story where music mattered. Again, a story where she mattered. And as they stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt ready. In the days that followed the charity gala, everything around them felt calmer, softer, almost like life itself had stepped back to allow things to settle. The guests had gone home, the music had faded, and the moment on stage, where she played and he listened with tears he tried to hide, was now replaying in both their minds. But neither said it out loud, He found himself thinking about her during quiet hours, something he wasn't used to. His life had always run on a strict schedule, full of sharp decisions and cold numbers. Yet now, scenes from that night appeared in his thoughts without permission. The way she sat at the piano, the gentle curve of her smile, the honesty in her voice. He wasn't sure what to do with these feelings, and for once, he didn't try to control them. She, on the other hand, returned to her small apartment, still carrying the warmth of the gala with her. The applause, the attention, the heartfelt reaction from him, it all stayed with her. She tried to go back to her normal routine, but it felt strange now. Something inside her had shifted, not because of the promise he made in confusion, not because of his wealth or power, but because he had finally seen her not as a waitress, not as someone beneath him, but as a soul with a voice. A few days later, he asked her to meet him. She hesitated for a moment before agreeing. When she arrived, he wasn't surrounded by guards or assistants. He was waiting alone, looking almost nervous, something she never imagined she would see. They walked through a quiet garden beside his office building. He didn't try to impress her or show off any.